Hello everyone, taking a first look at a map is a lot different from looking at an aircraft. The aircraft can almost be viewed as an extension of oneself. The wings can represent one's arms, the undercarriage one's legs, the engine one's libido, and I think you all know where we're going with the weapons. Many people see the map as just a pretty picture scrolling past in the background, but in fact it's the raison d'etre for the aircraft. It's what makes the aircraft want to rise up, power its engines and fire its weapons. So in this video, we'll take a look at the southeastern coast of Blighty to see if it's a beautiful lady, a handsome hunk, or just that toothless old sailor down the pub who'll gum your shaft for the price of a pint of cider. First of all, we're going to take a look at the proportions of the map because, as any lady or bottom will tell you, size matters. From what I can tell, the map is roughly 210 kilometers long by 210 kilometers wide. In this video we're concentrating on the area of the map covering southeastern England. The detailed area of the map at the southwestern edge of England begins at Newhaven. In the northwest the detailed area begins at the Royal Docks just outside London. Looking at the map within the mission editor, we can see there are currently on release 5 airfields available in England. Switching into the cockpit, the first field we're going to take a look at is Detling. It's a grass field. In the First World War it was used by the Royal Naval Air Service, and in 1939 RAF Detling opened. Looking at the list of squadrons stationed there during the war, it appears to have had slightly more servicemen on it than your mother, just not all at the same time. The aircraft stationed there included the Spitfire, the Hurricane, the P-51 Mustang and the Bristol Blenheim 4. Early in the war, Detling was used for reconnaissance, sea rescue and anti-submarine warfare. However, as the tide turned and the Allies switched their loop for sandpaper, it became predominantly a fighter base providing escorts for bombers. Turning north, we'll take a look at 2 areas of strategic importance, the Medway and Thames estuaries. These areas were of vital importance to the military and economic security of the United Kingdom. Chatham Dockyard, coming up on our right here, was an important Royal Navy installation. As such, it was an important target for the Luftwaffe and various Home Office anti-STD campaigns. Just 5 clicks north of the Medway estuary, you'll find yourself over the Thames estuary, which winds its way up into London. Coming up on the left, you'll see Gravesend, which had the Naval Port North Fleet on the river. It also had an RAF base, which is not there at present, but I'm sure will appear at some stage during the development process. Throughout the war, various RAF squadrons were stationed there, flying Hurricanes and Bristol Blenheims. Later in the war, the Polish 306 Squadron were stationed there. They were the first to be issued with P-51 Mustangs. Just off to the north on our right was Tilbury Docks. This was another important area targeted by the Luftwaffe. It's said that during the war you could get a dockside Hummer there for the price of a cup of tea. Ironically, due to the rationing of tea, you could suck dick all day there and still not get a cup. Coming up ahead we find the Royal Docks. It's the last detailed area of the map in the northwestern corner. The Royal Docks and surrounding areas were extremely heavily bombed during World War II. So this area could be very important for mission makers for both German attacks and Allied defences. The detailed portion of the map ends just about 2 kilometres beyond this point. The city of London itself is not on the map. Coincidentally, the main area once occupied by the docks is now London City Airport. Coming up ahead we have the ancient cultural site and cathedral city of Canterbury. This was heavily bombed in 1942 in what became known as the Baedeker Blitz. This in itself was revenge for the firebombing of the German medieval cities of Rostock and Lübeck. The raids were named after the famous 19th century travel guide to Great Britain by Karl Baedeker. As a result of the outrage at the Lübeck and Rostock bombings, the German authorities have vowed to bomb every building in the Baedeker guide with 3 stars. I suppose the only lesson we can learn from this is violent iconoclasm undermines one's cause and makes one's enemies more determined to skullfuck you. The cathedral is not yet there in early access, but I'm sure it'll make an appearance before completion. Just before the coast at Ramsgate we have RAF Manston. Hurricane squadrons were stationed here and it was indeed heavily bombed during the Battle of Britain. It has a large paved and a smaller grass runway. The paved runway was installed later in the war when Manston became an emergency airfield for bombers that were either damaged or running low on fuel. This is one of the airfields that makes me hope that at some point we'll see the Hurricane appear as a DCS module, along with flyable bombers. This airfield is the most spacious on the DCS Channel Map. With a little bit of planning and care, you could have multiple aircraft taking off and landing simultaneously. On the northwestern corner of the airfield you can see the various hangars, administration buildings and barracks, although during the height of the bombing many air crews sought refuge in nearby forests. We'll do a quick pass over Ramsgate, which was very important during the evacuation of Dunkirk. with over 4,000 boats leaving here. How they all fit in that tiny little harbour is anybody's fucking guess. Must have been like the toilet roll aisle at Tesco in April. Our next port of call, pun intended, is Dover. Dover, of course, is made famous by its white chalk cliffs and the 1940s song about bluebirds flying over them. I recommend you visit the area, but the locals are very reserved people and not at all proud or boastful. So if you want to see the famed Dover Cliff bluebird, I suggest you go to a local bar. At first you'll be rebuffed, but if you're doggedly persistent and cross their palms with some queen sheets, you'll see the rarest sight in England. Dover's history as an entry point to England stretches back to prehistoric times. If you look at the centre of the medieval castle on the cliff, you'll see a church with a tower almost awkwardly leaning against it. That tower is a 1900-year-old Roman lighthouse. The port, town and castle are exquisitely modelled, and an absolute credit to those who designed this map. There is one more point of interest in this area that was crucial to not only the Battle of Britain but the entire war. You'll find a number of these sites dotted along the southwestern coast of England in the Channel Map, but this is by far the best example I've found. For the uninitiated, I am of course speaking of the Chain Home radar system. In my eagerness to show you this, I got a little bit too close and had to take some minor evasive action to avoid hanging from one of the antennae by my scrotum. It's pretty much impossible to overestimate the importance of this system to the Allies in the war. Obviously, if you're flying German aircraft, it's going to be an important strategic attack point. Leaving Dover behind on a hill just north of Folkestone, we have Raf Hawk Hinch. It almost sounds like Bjorkminge, and coincidentally enough today it's oh so quiet. This is a grass field and was a fighter base throughout the war, with Spitfire and Hurricane squadrons stationed there. Looking at the grass runways, one starts to wonder how many cross-eyed pilots landed beside the runway or near the runway or beside the airbase. Just 10 or so kilometres west of Bjorkminge we find RAF Lyme. Yes, I know how it's spelled, but if you try to pronounce it the way it's spelled, you're just going to sound like you're attempting to gargle spunk again. During the war, Lyme hosted the 609 squadron, of which the only German RAF pilot, Ken Adam, was a member. It later hosted Belgian and Czech squadrons. One of the most curious things about Lyme is that in 1941 the British heard rumours that Hitler's personal pilot Hans Bauer was planning on defecting and landing at Lyme, taking the little shouty cocksucker with him. You could just imagine his face as he was greeted by the RAF. That's enough to make the little cunt's moustache curl. This was supposed to happen in March 1941 and may sound crazy, but in May 1941 Hitler's bottom bitch Rudolf Hess parachuted into Scotland on a peace mission. It is said he was desperate to negotiate peace with the United Kingdom due to the upcoming invasion of the Soviet Union, and that he was also mentally unstable due to the constant trolling he received on Twitter. Our last available airfield at the moment in Blighty is High Halden. As you can see, it's much tidier and more organised than Bjorksminge. I was surprised to learn that even in the 1940s it was called High Halden. I thought the name was changed because of the amount of grow houses the police have found there. High Halden was a prototype advanced landing field, of the type used later in Normandy. It was home to the United States Army Air Force 358th Fighter Group. At the start of the war they were equipped with P-40 Warhawks, and then in 1943 they were equipped with P-47 Thunderbolts. Anyone who has the Normandy map will recognise the layout of the airfield, and indeed the materials used for the runway. At the end of the war, the first British jet fighters, the Gloucester Meteor, were stationed here. Just east of Hastings we see another nice but smaller example of a chain home site. Hastings was another port that was used during the evacuation of Dunkirk. In fact, during the war itself it was bombed 85 times. Its history as an entry point to England goes back to prehistoric times, but perhaps it's most famous for the battle in 1066 between William the Conqueror and King Harold. During the battle, King Harold is said to have coined the phrase, "Watch that cocksucker with the bow, he'll have some fucker's eye out." Of course, during the war, Hastings would have looked a little bit different from this. In fact, it would have looked more like the deck of the Admiral Kuznetsov, mostly on fire. As we turn over New Haven, which is the last detailed area on the southwestern corner of the map, and head back east over Eastbourne, I'll sum up my final thoughts and ideas on the English section of this map. Before we move on to the obvious, I'd like to discuss the potential of this map. With its location and level of detail, this map has the potential to be the go-to place for those wishing to simulate perhaps the most interesting and definitely the most romanticised era of military aviation history. I am of course speaking of the Battle of Britain. I would love to see more earlier World War II aircraft appear as DCS modules, talking of course about Spitfire Mark 1s, Mark 5s, Hurricanes, Warhawks, Beaufighters and all the rest. As World War II maps go, the potential for this one is pretty much endless. The southern England sector of this map is absolutely gorgeous, and the detail level in some places is astounding. There are some suburban areas where an obvious copy-pasta can be seen with the roads and houses. There are some landmarks missing, but the map is in early access and as such in active development. On the airfields front, I think there are only 4 more airfields required to complete the map. They are Gravesend, West Malling, East Church and of course Biggin Hill. Of course, as soon as I hit publish, there'll be some fucker in the comments telling me I forgot about the airfield where his grandmother lost her virginity to 5 Canadian airmen and the squadron mascot Border Collie. At the beginning of the video I touched on the idea that a map should immerse you in the time and the place. Well, this map is gorgeous, and on that front it certainly doesn't disappoint. The map runs quite well, but I have noticed a couple of technical issues. Every so often there is a micro stutter, and very occasionally you do get the odd macro stutter. Full disclosure here, I am more or less exclusively running open beta and flying around in an early access aircraft, and as it's very early access those issues will be ironed out over time. On the FPS front, for me it runs as well as the Caucasus, Normandy or the Strait of Hormuz. They say to bookend a video there's nothing like a good landing, and believe me, this is fucking nothing like a good landing. I'll end the video by attempting to answer the question I posed at the beginning. The southeastern England section of the channel map is indeed a beautiful lady. A beautiful lady tantalisingly presenting herself while the handsome hunk holds the video camera and the toothless sailor sits in the wardrobe singing sea shanties while masturbating furiously. And on that note, I thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to dislike or tell me to go fuck myself below.